We will rein in wasteful spending without sacrificing public safety.
Governor Hobbs unveiled her priorities for 2024 in the State of the State address. We'll break down what they are and get a response from Republican leadership tonight on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged. On Monday, Governor Hobbs gave the annual State of the State address with a focus on education and the border, and she laid down some battle lines with Republicans for the legislative session.
Katie Hobbs, Governor of the state of Arizona.
Governor Katie Hobbs picking a fight with Republicans to kick off the new year.
I will always defend Arizonans' freedoms, and I refuse to back down in the face of those who want to criminalize doctors and outlaw abortion. That's not happening on my watch.
The Democratic governor's call to expand abortion access is a non-starter with her opposition this year, but it was her demand to rein in the state school voucher program that put her on a collision course with Republicans.
It is our responsibility as stewards of this state to put in place guardrails to ensure taxpayer dollars dedicated to education are used properly. Now is the time to advocate for accountability and transparency, not a blank check.
Protecting Empowerment Scholarship Accounts, or ESAs, is a top priority for the GOP. The program allows parents to send their kids to private school with taxpayer money. And during a speech, the governor continued to warn it threatens to blow a hole in state finances. Her demand for stronger checks on ESA spending prompted one GOP lawmaker to turn his back on Hobbs in protest and left other Republicans howling even before her speech.
We do not believe that we should be forcing private schools to do something that they're already doing simply because the governor is trying to virtue signal to her base.
GOP lawmakers did like some of the governor's ideas: stricter regulations on long-term living facilities, sober living homes, water, and the border appeared to be areas where both sides can compromise.
I think there's some specific things, the targets that Republicans want to hit, benchmarks, and make sure what we are doing with that money. And yes, we're going to make sure we put money into the border. We'll continue to do that.
House Speaker Ben Thomas said he was happy the governor was talking about border security. But with an election year looming, the coming session is still expected to be a contentious one. Speaker Thomas and Senate President Warren Petersen set the tone before the governor spoke, breaking with tradition and delivering their own remarks while making Hobbs wait in another room.
Our plan is one that anyone can get behind.
And the governor is still working with a Republican majority in the legislature, so getting her agenda passed will take some compromise. I spoke with Senate President Warren Petersen about her speech and the coming legislative session. And thank you very much for joining us here today, Mr. Senate President Warren Petersen. I appreciate you taking some time out to talk to us. Now, I want to get into what Senate and the Republican agenda is this year for the legislative session, but I do want to start with the big news of the week. I want to start getting your response and your reaction to the governor's State of the State speech, which sets the tone for the entire legislature.
Well, we're excited about this session. Last session, we had a majority plan. We delivered on that. She signed most of it. This session, we have a majority plan as well. We shared some of that early on. I feel like those are all things that she can join with us on. Her speech wasn't real specific. I don't know if you heard something different than I did,
yeah.
But I didn't hear any specific initiatives really that she hasn't talked about already. So I think a lot of what she shared, we've had some response to. Housing, water, those are huge priorities for our caucus. I feel like we can find solutions there. We've got the election, the recount issue with elections
I do want to ask you
up.
specifically about that a little bit, yeah.
I feel like that's something that we'll come together on. So, and last session we came together on a budget. We put up a very lean budget the first time. She vetoed that, but we were ultimately able to come together and get a bipartisan budget done with every Republican on it and most of the Democrats. So.
Yeah, and to be fair to the governor on lack of specifics, State of the State speeches tend to lack a lot of those specifics. It's a time for broad announcements, broad pronouncements, to set the vision for what the year is going to be. We're going to get, in everybody, the public, you, me, everybody's going to get more details on specifics when we get the budget proposal, what the governor's going to be releasing late in the week. And I'm sure we'll be talking about on this show a lot next week. But a big issue of contention right now is setting up like the Republicans and the governor on a collision course over ESAs. The governor has announced that she wants to rein in this program. She thinks there's been a lot of reports of fraud, abuse with the system. Republicans were very much opposed to this on the floor. One of your members even stood up and turned their back on the governor in protest when she said she wanted to do this.
So it seems like she's a little out of touch on this issue. I have not heard from one of my constituents about ESAs. You know what I'm hearing from my constituents? I'm hearing about inflation, and I'm hearing about the border, and I'm hearing about crime. Those are the things that we should be focused on. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about ESAs that have been spread. Cost is one of them. The ESA costs about $7,500 on average. To educate a child in public school, it's about $14,000. So there's a large tax savings there to the taxpayer. That's important for people to understand.
Well, first of all, I do want to ask about some of the reporting we've seen on some of the misallocation of this ESA money. I'll ask you about that in a second. But since you brought up the spending and how much it costs per pupil, ESA versus public school, your own budget analysts have put out reports. I believe they put out one in November that shows it does cost taxpayers more to send a kid to school through an ESA than the public school. That's your own budget. That's your own budget analysis.
That's actually not accurate, Dennis.
JLBC, the numbers are wrong.
No, you're misunderstanding what they're saying.
Okay.
They're saying it cost you didn't understand what they said.
Okay.
I'm sure they got it right. It costs the general fund money. The taxpayer saves money. So there's different accounts.
It's the difference between taxpayer and general fund. It's all taxpayer money.
No,
right?
it's not. There's a huge difference, Dennis. If you have a checking account and a savings account, if you have two accounts, it costs one account more money, but you save money in the other account. It's the same. Overall, the taxpayer saves $7,000. From our general fund, yes, there is a small expense, and this is a fact as well that JLBC will share with you. We were under projections for K-12 spending. So even though ESAs were higher, they're a portion of the K-12 budget. And the K-12 is under budget.
What about some of the guardrails that she calls them guardrails to put on to make sure that this money is not being misspent on things like she brought up luxury driving lessons, ski trips, and things like that? What is wrong with more accountability on this?
There's nothing wrong with accountability, but we want to have accountability in everything. What we don't want to do is pick out three examples of something and then shut down a whole program that is giving parents choice. You had the superintendent of Scottsdale indicted. You've had embezzlement happen with public schools. Are you suggesting we get rid of public schools because those things happen? Of course not. No, let's get tough on crime. If there's crime, if there's fraud, nobody wants that. But you don't just handpick three examples, magnify it. I really don't understand the obsession with the ESAs. My citizens are talking to me about inflation and border and crime. And this population is very small. I don't use ESAs, but if parents want to use ESAs, I'm going to protect parental choice. What this is really about, the message that is really being sent here, is that you have teacher unions that feel threatened, and Katie Hobbs is trying to protect the teachers' unions. I don't know why. It's not a threat. It's a very small population. Public schools aren't going anywhere. Let's let parents decide.
And one other part about that had to deal with what the governor's calling security for students, and it's like fingerprint background checks that would require these private schools that take this ESA money to fingerprint, their staff, their teachers and whatnot, so they can do some background checks. A member of your own caucus, Jake Hoffman, was the day of the State of the State speech said it's a no-go for him. He says that the private schools are already doing this. And my understanding is some of the private schools are doing this. Maybe a lot of them are doing this. But when we asked him, how does he know all the schools are doing this, he couldn't answer that.
Yeah.
Is the fingerprinting component of this something that you could get behind and Republicans can get behind when it comes to this?
I don't have a problem with somebody taking fingerprints. Here's what I have a problem with. I was working with a young kid. He was actually a trainer of mine for a little while. And he got hired by the high school to be the coach. And they said, you had to go fine, you're hired. You need to get your fingerprint clearance card. He got his fingerprint clearance card 3 months later, and the season was over. So I'm okay. We can do background checks or whatever we need to do, but you can't be waiting on government. If government's in control of it, and you got to wait for government. Now, if we have something where, I know as a business owner, I can do criminal background checks immediately. I do that with I'm able to do that with my employees. We can do that with people who criminal background checks, we need to be more like Amazon and less like government. So if any of these things require us to wait on government, that's going to be a problem.
And still ahead, more with Senate President Warren Petersen, including an area where Republicans may find some common ground with the governor, border policy, when Politics Unplugged continues.